Close your eyes for a moment and imagine waking up on the 29th of June. You have no idea that before sunset, a famous theater will burn to the ground. A single signature will lay the foundation for the world's largest highway network. Two nations near nuclear war will shake hands hundreds of kilometers above the Earth. Millions will line up for a device that will completely redefine modern life. Somewhere in France, a child will be born whose words remind millions that what is essential is invisible to the eye. At first, these stories seem to have nothing in common. One is about fire, another is about concrete and steel. One reaches into space, while another fits inside your pocket. But together, they reveal something extraordinary. History isn't changed only by wars or kings. Sometimes it changes because a spark lands on the wrong roof, or an engineer imagines a better road. Because former enemies decide to trust each other, and one invention quietly changes how billions think, work, and communicate. Every day on the calendar carries its own stories. Most are forgotten, but a few reshape civilization. Today, we're traveling back to the 29th of June, not to memorize dates, but to witness 5 moments that changed the world. Our first stop is London, and the year is 1613. The air smells of wood smoke and the River Thames. Crowds pour across London Bridge, laughing, talking, and hurrying toward the city's most famous theater. No one knows that by sunset, it will exist only in memory. London, the 29th of June, 1613. The city is alive. Nearly 200,000 people crowd its narrow streets, making it one of the largest cities in Europe. Merchants shout from market stalls, and horses pull wooden carts through muddy roads. The smell of fresh bread mixes with smoke from countless chimneys. Across the River Thames stands a building unlike any other, the Globe Theatre. For thousands of Londoners, this is more than a place to watch plays. It is where they laugh, cry, debate politics, and escape the hardships of everyday life. Most importantly, it is the home of William Shakespeare. By now, Shakespeare has written many plays that will become the greatest works in human history. But on this afternoon, no one is thinking about legacy. They're simply here for a good performance, and today's play is Henry VIII. The audience fills every corner, with wealthy nobles watching from covered galleries. Ordinary Londoners, the groundlings, stand shoulder to shoulder in the open courtyard below. The actors take the stage, and the performance is captivating. Every line, every costume, and every gesture draws the audience deeper into the story. Then comes a scene designed to impress the crowd. A small theatrical cannon is fired. The explosion echoes through the wooden theater. The audience cheers. It seems like nothing more than another special effect. High above them, a tiny piece of burning wadding lands silently on the dry roof. No one notices, not the actors, not the musicians, not the people watching below. For nearly a minute, the fire smolders quietly, then a thin ribbon of smoke rises. Someone points upward, another person turns around, and smoke becomes flame. The dry thatch ignites with terrifying speed, racing across the roof. Faster than possible. The applause disappears, laughter turns into screams as parents grab their children. People shove toward the narrow exits. Actors abandon the stage as burning debris falls. One eyewitness recalled a man's trousers caught fire, extinguished with a bottle of ale. Miraculously, despite the panic, there are no reports of anyone losing their life. The globe itself is not so fortunate, becoming a giant furnace of oak timber. The intense heat sends sparks drifting across the sky, destroying a cultural landmark. In less than 2 hours, nothing remains but smoke, ash, and blackened beams. For many, it must have felt like the end of something truly irreplaceable. After all, this was Shakespeare's theater. How could it ever be replaced? Yet history often hides its greatest lesson inside its darkest moments. The globe was destroyed, but Shakespeare was not. His plays survived because stories are harder to burn than buildings. Within a year, the theater was rebuilt, actors returned, and audiences followed. Over the centuries, Shakespeare's words traveled farther than anyone could have imagined. Today, his plays are performed in almost every corner of the world. The fire failed to erase its greatest treasure, proving ideas outlive their walls. While London was rebuilding its theater, humanity's next transformation was still centuries away. This time, the stage would not be made of wood, but concrete and steel. More than 3 centuries passed, and the world changed into something unrecognizable. Empires had risen and fallen. Steam engines gave way to automobiles. Airplanes now crossed oceans that once took months to navigate by ship. Yet despite all this progress, one surprisingly simple problem held America back: its roads. In the early 1950s, driving across the United States was an unpredictable adventure. Outside major cities, highways narrowed into two-lane roads winding through small towns. Traffic lights interrupted travel, and freight trucks crawled through crowded streets. A journey could take weeks, and moving military equipment was nearly impossible. One man understood this better than anyone. President Dwight D. Eisenhower had experienced the road system firsthand decades earlier. In 1919, he joined a military convoy, traveling from Washington to San Francisco. The trip covered over 3,000 miles and took 62 exhausting days. The experience stayed with him. During the Second World War, Eisenhower witnessed Germany's modern Autobahn network. Troops and supplies moved with remarkable speed, making him compare them to home. If the United States wanted to remain secure, it needed more than scattered highways. It needed a national network. On the 29th of June 1956, Eisenhower signed the Federal Aid Highway Act. It was just ink on paper, with no crowds or fireworks celebrating. But history has a habit of hiding its biggest revolutions inside quiet moments. The law authorized the Interstate highway system, stretching 48,000 miles. Bulldozers arrived, bridges rose, mountains were cut open, and tunnels pierced rock. For years, crews worked across every state on a massive infrastructure project. The effects reached far beyond simple transportation. Factories received raw materials faster, and farmers shipped produce before it spoiled. Families discovered the freedom of road trips, while new suburbs expanded rapidly. Restaurants, motels, and gas stations appeared, creating entirely new local economies. Companies found themselves operating in a much smaller, faster world. The American landscape itself began to change. Some neighborhoods were divided, and small towns were bypassed entirely by progress. It created opportunities, but it also came with consequences we still debate. Even so, the system became a model for transportation networks around the world. Every day, millions of people drive these roads without wondering who imagined them or why they were built. Yet every mile traces back to a decision made on the 29th of June, 1956. A reminder that sometimes the most powerful inventions are not glamorous. Sometimes they are simply the roads that quietly connect everything else. While highways brought people together, history proved rivals could find common ground above. For nearly half a century, the world watched two superpowers compete for dominance. The United States and the Soviet Union raced to build bigger, more powerful weapons. Every achievement in space became another exhausted symbol of national pride. When the Soviet Union launched the first artificial satellite, Sputnik, the world was stunned. When Yuri Gagarin became the first human in space, the competition intensified. The United States answered with the Apollo program, culminating in the 1969 moon landing. Each victory was celebrated, and each setback was scrutinized. Space had become another battlefield, one without bullets, but filled with political significance. For decades, cooperation seemed almost impossible. Then, the Cold War came to an end. The collapse of the Soviet Union changed the landscape, but mistrust doesn't just disappear. If the former rivals were ever going to work together, they needed proof. That proof arrived on the 29th of June, 1995. High above Earth, the space shuttle Atlantis slowly approached the Russian space station Mir. The closing speed was measured in inches per second. Every movement had to be perfect, because a mistake could damage both spacecraft. Inside Atlantis, American astronauts watched their instruments in near silence. Aboard Mir, Russian cosmonauts waited patiently. As the distance narrowed, planning and diplomacy came down to a single delicate maneuver. Then came the gentle contact, as metal met metal and locks engaged. For the first time, an American space shuttle successfully docked with the Russian station. It was not a dramatic explosion or a triumphant flag planting. It was something far more meaningful. Former adversaries opened their hatches and greeted one another with smiles and handshakes. Only a few years earlier, their countries had aimed nuclear weapons at each other. Now they shared meals, scientific experiments, and living quarters above the planet. The Shuttle Mir program became far more than a series of missions. American astronauts learned how to live in space for months at a time. Russian engineers shared decades of experience operating long-duration space stations. Scientists from both nations conducted medical and technical research. That research would have been impossible alone. More importantly, the missions built trust, though not perfect or permanent trust, but it was enough to attempt something even more ambitious. Without lessons from Atlantis and Mir, the International Space Station might never have become reality. Today, astronauts from countries across the world routinely live and work together aboard the ISS. Political disagreements continue on Earth, Yet above the atmosphere, cooperation remains possible. The image of astronauts floating through connected spacecraft reminds us that perspective changes everything. From orbit, national borders disappear, and there are no lines separating countries. No walls, no checkpoints, only one planet suspended in darkness. Sometimes history moves forward, not when people defeat one another, but when they decide to build something together. While that partnership was unfolding high above, another revolution was quietly taking shape closer to home. It wasn't happening inside a government building or a space agency. It was happening outside electronics stores, where thousands were waiting for a product experts believed would fail. The line began forming long before sunrise, with people bringing folding chairs, coffee, and umbrellas. Television cameras moved from person to person, asking the same question: "What are you waiting for?" The answer sounded surprisingly simple: a phone. To many watching the news, the excitement seemed almost irrational. People had camped for concert tickets or game consoles. But a mobile phone, in 2007, that hardly seemed worth the effort as the industry appeared mature. Companies like Nokia, Motorola, and BlackBerry dominated the market, being reliable and familiar. Physical keyboards were considered essential, styluses were common, and internet browsing was slow and frustrating. Most people accepted those limitations because they had never experienced anything different. Then Apple made a bold claim when Steve Jobs announced 3 revolutionary products: an iPod, a phone, and an internet communicator. The audience applauded after each announcement until Jobs smiled. They are not 3 separate devices, they are one device. The room erupted in one of the most memorable product launches in modern technology. Months later, on the 29th of June, 2007, the first iPhone officially went on sale. Customers rushed into Apple stores the moment the doors opened. Many activated the device before even leaving the parking lot. For the first time, millions experienced a phone controlled almost entirely by touch. Pinching to zoom felt almost magical, and scrolling seemed effortless. Browsing the internet no longer felt like a pathetic compromise. The hardware was impressive, but the real revolution came later. Within a year, Apple introduced the App Store to the masses. Suddenly, developers could create software for every pocket on Earth. The smartphone stopped being just a phone, as it became whatever we needed. It became a camera, a map, a music player, and a television. It became a notebook, a wallet, a gaming console, and a classroom. It became an office, a movie studio, and a navigation system. It became a health monitor and a connection to all human knowledge. Entire industries emerged around this tiny device, while others disappeared. Taxi companies faced ride-sharing apps, and paper maps became rare. Compact cameras struggled, music stores closed, and everything shifted. New careers appeared like app developers and social media creators. For better or worse, the smartphone changed the rhythm of life. Today, billions reach for their phones within minutes of waking up. They use them to communicate, work, shop, invest, and remember. Some critics argue that smartphones have made us more distracted. Others believe they have made humanity more connected than ever. Both arguments contain truth, but the scale of transformation is undeniable. Very few products have altered human behavior so quickly or completely. Those people waiting outside Apple stores were buying more than a gadget. Without realizing it, they were standing at the entrance to a new age. History usually announces itself with explosions and violent revolutions. Sometimes, it just begins with a quiet line outside a store. Not every lasting legacy is built from steel, concrete, or silicon. Some are built from words, like the life of Antoine de Saint-Exupéry. On the 29th of June, 1900, in Lyon, a boy was born into an aristocratic family. No one could have imagined this child would write such a beloved book. As a young man, Saint-Exupéry fell in love with the danger of flying. Aviation was in its infancy, and aircraft were fragile wooden machines. He became a pioneer of airmail, flying dangerous routes across the world. There were no sophisticated weather forecasts, no satellite navigation, no radar. Pilots often found themselves alone above endless deserts or mountain ranges. A single mistake could prove fatal. These solitary flights changed him. High above the earth, surrounded by silence, he saw the world differently. Flying stripped life down to its essentials, teaching him humility and responsibility. Those experiences would eventually become the heart of his writing. Then came war. As World War II engulfed Europe, he flew again. He witnessed destruction on a scale. Cities burned and friends disappeared. Exiled from his homeland, he lived in the United States, carrying his pain. In 1943, he wrote a small book that was unlike anything else. At first glance, The Little Prince appears to be a simple children's story. A pilot crashes, he meets a mysterious little boy from another planet. Together, they talk about roses, foxes, stars, and distant worlds. But beneath its simplicity lies something far deeper for us to find. The book asks questions that every generation eventually has to face. What makes a friendship meaningful? Why are adults consumed by status? What does it truly mean to love? What is essential in life? One sentence has echoed across generations. What is essential is invisible. It is quoted in classrooms and weddings, not for easy answers. It reminds us to look beyond everything that can be measured. Saint-Exupéry never saw the extraordinary legacy his book would leave behind. On the 31st of July, 1944, while flying a mission, he disappeared without a trace. No distress call, no final message, he just vanished into the air. For decades, the circumstances of his last flight remained a mystery. Yet while the man vanished, his words endured through the years. The Little Prince has been translated into hundreds of different languages. It sold over 200 million copies, one of the best-selling books. Children discover it as a fairy tale, adults return to it as meditation. That may be the greatest irony of all. He crossed vast distances. He is remembered not for the skies, but for his quiet wisdom. As we look back on the 29th of June, a remarkable pattern begins to emerge. A theater burned, but great stories survived. A highway connected a nation. Former rivals chose cooperation over confrontation in space. A smartphone transformed the daily lives of billions. A writer reminded us that the most powerful truths cannot always be seen. None of these people woke up believing they were about to change history. To them, it was simply another day. History is like that. It rarely announces itself in advance. The moments that shape the future often feel ordinary while they are happening. Only years later do we recognize their true significance. Perhaps that is why studying history matters, not because it allows us to memorize dates, but because it teaches us to recognize the power of human imagination, perseverance, and choice. Every invention begins as an idea. Every great work begins with a single page. Every journey begins with one step. And every turning point in history begins as just another day on the calendar. Thank you for joining us as we traveled through the 29th of June. Tomorrow holds another date, another collection of forgotten moments, and perhaps another story that changed the world forever. Until then, remember this: history isn't hidden in the past, it is being written today.